They see a world where there's no cash at all, where fiat currency is in demise. In other words, fiat currency goes down, and literally the voice, in terms of, at the moment they have no voice. We've seen decades of declining wages. They say that wages will actually increase in Western. Additionally, and they talk about the return of philosophy and language degrees, which I think are fantastic, because these are so important in artificial intelligence. And just to give you an example of artificial intelligence, I'd just like to thank Matthew, Sarah's father, and Sarah, Mrs. Sarah, with Talua, who's the most beautiful dog. Matthew and Sarah, just lovely, warm, kind, honourable people. Basically took this dog, was maltreated, and this dog has literally got a smile on its face. Thank you so much, Matthew and Sarah, for being so kind. Thank you. Oh, hello everyone, it's Susie Crew from Esoteric Trading Solutions. I hope you're all well. I hope you're looking after yourself, being kind to yourself, being kind to your family and your friends, looking after your beautiful dogs, your beautiful cats, your beautiful animals, whatever you have, and just being kind to the stranger in the world, or anyone else, or animals, just to make this world a better place. It certainly needs to be a better place, that's for sure. A report that I want to cover today, and I found absolutely fascinating because I love economics and I love history, is a Deutsche Bank research report called Concept Imagine 2030, and it actually talks about the future from now to 2030, how they see the future, and it is an amazing report. So I'll put it up on YouTube. It's 82 pages, but I tell you, it's seriously worth reading. Deutsche Bank do some fantastic research, I have to say, and the research basically is very bullish, very positive. Cryptocurrency from here on to 2030. They see a world where there's no cash at all, where fiat currency is in demise. In other words, fiat currency goes down, and literally cryptocurrency is the way to go. I find the report fascinating, so please have a look at it. We'll cover some of the ideas that they've got up until 2030, and it is an amazing read, and a lot of it I actually believe in, and I think it's going to happen when you look at the trends of what's happening in society and what's going on the ground. And it is fascinating. They do obviously qualify it and say, look, this is pretty much what we believe. We obviously get things wrong. It's very hard to predict things, but according to what we see on the ground, what we see in terms of the stats, where we see the future going, we can actually prove in terms of the statistics where we actually see things going. So I think it's a very, very, very good report, and it's very well written as well. So they do say that people had all these views, in the 1980s, from even the Aldous Huxley, Brave New World, but things were completely different. But they do tend to say that the next 10 years are going to be quite dynamic. There's going to be a lot of changes in terms of climate change. There's going to be a lot of changes in terms of finance, how government, the populace will rise, in terms of the people will rise against governments. The people will have much more, much more voice, in terms of, at the moment they have no voice. We've seen decades of declining wages. They say that wages will actually increase, and they're starting to see that through some of the larger companies in the US, for example, like Amazon, Facebook, and Starbucks, and not. And also just changes in the food supply, changes in what's going to happen in China, changes in what's going to happen in India, and that sort of thing. So let me just go through this because it's just so interesting, and I just wanted to bring it to your attention. They actually, looking at the summary, and I'll just go through the summary and then we'll go through it. These are the things they cover. The end of fiat money, how Europe can stop falling behind in the 2020s, China's consumer decade, the end of high profit margins, which I've just spoken about with the banks particularly, and you will see that simply because wages will start to go up. They also say the power of the unions will come back. People will have more power than what they have now, because at the moment, certainly in terms of working, employers have all the power, employers have no power, and they say that will be switched around in the next 10 years or so. The power will go back to the people, and I believe it needs to. They talk about food price inflation. Food is a resource that's declining. We've seen food price inflation in Asia and in India and those sort of countries, where rice went up literally in 1 year 36%. A lot of people were striking. There was even a fellow that lit himself on fire, unfortunately. They talk about the rise of the drones, which we're starting to see that. The rise of the drones, it doesn't cause any carbon emission, no pollution. They also talk about precision medicine going on mainstream. They talk about the end of cash and the plastic cards, which I think is an inevitable. They talk about how governments will respond to record debt, but they do say in that sense that record debt will be here to stay. They say that there's political tipping points at the moment, and I tend to agree with that. If you look at politicians in the world, the thing is, as I've said before, there's 50.2% males in the world, and there's 49.8% 49.8% females. Excuse me. And yet the whole world seems to be very at the top. You seem to have more white Anglo-Saxon Protestant males, above the age of 55 or 60. And it's not looking at diversity at all in terms of other people, whether it be women, whether it be, different types of people from different ethnicities, which is not a good thing, because the whole world has a mix of different people, and all we're seeing is one particular view of the wealthy, particularly at the top, which is not great, particularly when not everyone's wealthy. There's 2,000 billionaires in the world, as I said the other day in one of my YouTubes, but again, there's so much poverty in the world that the current political and economic system certainly needs to change. And this report also reflects on that. It talks about India, it talks about the rise of corporate taxation, and I agree with that, because currently at the moment, corporate taxation the last 20 years has been going down, lower and lower and lower, and yet the individual tax rate is going up, and we tend to pay more tax than some of the big, large corporates. Now, I know Google was earning a lot of revenue in Australia, and Facebook, and yet they never paid $1 of tax at all, and apparently they didn't pay any tax at all for certain things. I know they had to pay tax in America, but there was, apparently their tax rates are very low. They talk about electric cars. They talk about climate policy being more pragmatic, which it needs to be, particularly when everything's, climate change is here to stay. Some people don't believe it, of course, but I certainly do. They talk about the demographic dividend. They talk about people actually, even though the world population is getting older, they're talking about people's behaviour actually being younger. So in other words, just because we're all getting older, like for example, a 55-year-old now is so much younger than a 55-year-old was, say, back in 1950. We look younger, we act younger, our purchasing power is different to a person that was in the 1950s, that would have been 50 or 60, for example. It also talks about the population living longer. And so living longer, our choices are different in terms of the way we live as well. And I think that's very interesting in itself. So, just because someone's in their 50s or 60s, they're up with technology. They know about Bitcoin. They know about cryptocurrency markets. They're ahead of the curve, and it's a very interesting, I have to say, interesting report. They talk about sports statistics and artificial intelligence. They talk about quantum supremacy in terms of computers, the winner takes all. They talk about urbanisation. They talk about the returns of the unions, a 6-hour workday, which we've seen in Sweden, which apparently works very well because people don't take off as many sick days, and also they work much more efficiently. And they talk about the return of philosophy and language degrees, which I think are fantastic because these are so important in artificial intelligence. And just to give you an example of artificial intelligence, one of my friends went to China and rang up for some water, and it was delivered by a robot that delivered the water, came to the door, knocked on the door, basically opened up its little chute or whatever and delivered this water. And once the person picked up the water from its little chute, the robot said thank you and then went away. So pretty amazing in terms of artificial intelligence. So let's go back to the start of this report. So one of the biggest things they say in this report is the excuse me, the end of fiat markets. The forces that hold fiat monetary system together look fragile, particularly decades of low labour costs. Over the next decade, some of these forces could begin to unravel, and demand for alternative currencies from gold to crypto could take off. So they're quite bullish, cryptocurrency particularly, and gold, and that's pretty much my view of the world. They then talk on about Europe falling behind the US and China. The continent must adopt 3 policies to revive its fortunes. They need to develop much more in terms of monetary, fiscal and structural policy to mitigate Europe's demographic deterioration and the severe technology deficit. And again, Europe, in my mind, tends to be way behind the curve, absolutely. And what they mean by monetary policy, obviously, is whether you reduce rates or increase rates, whether you pursue a quantitative easing policy or not. What they mean by fiscal policy is the fiscal policies like, for example, your taxation policy in terms of corporate or in terms of individual, in terms of subsidiaries or benefit. And structural change is, basically how is the structure of the system set up in terms of, operations, in terms of barriers to entry, that sort of thing. So they're saying that Europe is way behind the curve, and it looks like it is falling behind the curve. They're going on, then they talk about China. Chinese economic will be driven by a key theme. In the last 2 decades, they spoke about exports and public investment. They say in the next decade, it will be about consumer, a consumption decade. And I believe that too. If you look at China, they've got 1.4 billion people. There's a huge rising middle class that's coming from an agricultural economy or a farmer-driven economy. These people, 400, 500 mil, are moving into the cities and becoming more lower middle class from an agricultural environment, and so their spending power is much greater indeed, and they're looking for many Western type product and different type of product to what they would have had working on a farm or whatnot. For example, in the cities they're probably more into buying better food and makeup and all different types of things. So then they go on to the end of the profit margins for corporate and banks, and I do believe this. Profit margins have been at all-time highs in the last 20 years, but they are now starting to come down, and we're certainly seeing that with the banks, and that's what I said in my last YouTube. Banks are really struggling to maintain their profit margins because there is so much competition in non-bank finance. You're not a bank, you come from the fintech area, and fintech is reducing costs quite dramatically and making it very competitive for the banks and taking away their clients. So the banks don't have the opportunity going forward to basically gouge and take heaps of money away from the consumer, whether it be in terms of payments, or foreign currency, because clearly, when you bring Ripple and XRP into the picture with payments, the finance industry is way ahead, and Ripple and FX payments and the like, people will use that as an alternative to the banks, and that's going to be a huge theme going forward, absolutely, and it will come from the people, there's no doubt about it. Also, this puts in light, if the profit margins are lower, is there a question that the equity market is too high? And I tend to believe the equity market is too high. simply because profits will come down. They talk about food. There'll be on-demand ordering of food, because food will be basically, in short supply essentially. Food, is already in short supply in many different economies in the world, in many different countries, and they talk about the entire food value chain changing, and it will be more supply driven than demand, because simply if the food's not available, you won't be able to get it. So basically the suppliers will be dictating the terms of food, because if it's not there, you won't be able to get it. And it talks about putting your orders in with supermarkets in a week or 2 weeks in the future, and the supermarkets will be different as well. You won't necessarily go to the supermarket, you have to put your order in and it'll be delivered in a week or two. So, and that's how they talk about supply, food value chain. Now that also, if you think about cryptocurrency, relate this back to cryptocurrency, that means that any of the supply chain cryptocurrencies are going to do very well, okay? So think about that in terms of the industry that is going to do well out of this. It'll be certainly the supply chain cryptocurrencies, and obviously food in itself. If you look at the equity market, food stocks, in terms of that too. So, and obviously, the value add around delivering food and creating food and that sort of thing. They talk about the rise of drones, and again, this limits noise, it limits pollution. Drones will basically do all sorts of things, deliver things. They say there'll be lower traffic, and the delivery of medical supply gains acceptance, that sort of thing. Going to the top of this, just got to do this, I'm dealing with two computers here. They say that precision medicine will go mainstream. Tests and treatment will be tailored to individuals rather than just, you go to a healthcare place and everything's, done as such. One thing they did miss in this report, which I think is fairly important, is, IDs. How many times have you had to, prove your ID with someone anywhere you go? I believe with cryptocurrency particularly, ID identification is going to be huge. So in other words, I can go to Europe, I can go to America, or I can go to Australia, and I don't have to keep producing my passport or my ID or anything else. They'll just have it on a decentralized database, like distributed ledger technology of cryptocurrency, obviously, and it'll be identification globally for everyone, and it'll be in a decentralized cryptocurrency database. So clearly that will be an opportunity. Any cryptocurrency that's in self-identity will be a big plus as well. Also, they talk about the end of cash and the plastic card, and already we're starting to see that. India actually reduced circulation of their large bills. There's less cash ever today than there was in the past. Certainly it was more of a cash economy, and certainly plastic cards are almost becoming old school as well. People can now do all sorts of things on their phone, and they say that notes and coins will still be around, but it will not be the main thing used for purchasing. They say that they'll die out with smartphones and other electric devices, which make physical cash cards obsolete. They talk about record government debt, and they're effectively saying this will probably continue. They talk about there'll be a political backlash against globalisation and the reassertion of nation states. Obviously, they're talking about the immigration type policies and this sort of thing. And again, they're talking about Indian economies like see strong growth led by reforms and a growing working age population. Risk of rising corporate tax. Of course, corporate tax will be increased, which I particularly believe in. And then they talk about on-demand life. Basically, you'll have a super app. It says it's already here, but there'll be more going on in terms of in artificial intelligence. For example, you could have a robot going into a fire or something, or you could have a robot becoming a nurse and working in the infectious disease area of a hospital where it could be quite bad for a human being to go into that ward or something like that. electric cars, as we've said, climate changes, quantum supremacy, the winner takes all in terms of quantum computer supremacy. Surprise! So if you if you're worried about what your teenage son or girl is going to do, quantum computing is where to go, that's for sure. And the rise of the unions, and a 6-day workday, as I said, and the return of philosophy and language degrees, which I love, basically. So we'll go to the crypto section, and then I'll leave it for you guys to read this report. Entry cash, and they start obviously with the surge in Bitcoin, and obviously talking about Facebook announcing their Libra project, and they discuss that Facebook's got potentially 2 billion users, which essentially is massive, and if they did a cryptocurrency, then obviously that would really propel cryptocurrencies and the technology in the world as we see it. They do say that cryptocurrencies have always been additions rather than substitutes to global inventory of money. They have not managed to take off as a means of payment despite their well-known benefits such as security, speed, minimal transaction fees, ease of storage, and relevance in the digital era. So, and then they're obviously talking about the Chinese. The Chinese are very keen to bring in their own cryptocurrency through the government, and it'll be a digital cryptocurrency because they certainly want to eliminate cash going forward, and they've actually stated that, and essentially that's what they intend to do. Even though they've banned exchanges and mining and that sort of thing, the Chinese President, Mr. Xi Jinping, endorsed blockchain as an important breakthrough for independent innovation of core technologies. He's repeated that the Bank of China, the People's Bank of China, is intentions to have cash replaced by a central bank issued digital currency. The aim is to support the yuan circulation and internationalisation. Now, they've always said that, and interestingly enough, if they use cryptocurrency rather than fiat currency, they can avoid also the settlement systems of SWIFT, which are the US, which means that the US cannot control the Chinese bank accounts. And also the Chinese have always wanted more internationalisation of the yuan, and they've already been in the past doing very large swaps with Russia in terms of the yuan as well. So details to be confirmed, but it seems the digital currency may have the following characteristics. Commercial banks and the People's Bank of China will be the only issuers. It's interesting. The People's Bank of China will design all wallets possible without using the blockchain. You can have a distributed ledger system, which is a subset of the blockchain. With the government support, it's likely the Chinese people will move quickly to adopt the cryptocurrency, the digital cryptocurrency. Now, if you've got 1.4 billion in China, and say assumingly half of them are adults, we're talking about potentially 700 million, which is going to be huge. Okay. Also, they talk about India, that they've got rid of some of the large notes, and the government hasn't been very pro cryptocurrency at all, and that they keep delaying a committee on that to decide what they want to do. But recently a government economics panel pitched for the introduction for an official digital currency with the status of legal tender and regulated by the Reserve Bank of India. So the signs are on the wall here that cryptocurrency is certainly going to be the way to go, and I believe that myself pretty much. They say payment technology adoption becomes faster and faster. Basically, the fiat option is the old option of SWIFT. It's back, in the 20th century, not the 21st century, where banks and the like are just gouging for every cent they can out of the fiat option, and certainly cryptocurrencies on the rise. Now, I did something like this on another YouTube about the adoption rates of cryptocurrency and the internet, and Deutsche Bank effectively said that cryptocurrency mainstream adoption will be over this period of time. So basically the black one here is the number of users in the internet, and roughly, I can't remember the number of users for the internet. It was might have been up to 3-4 billion or something like that, but they're looking at the adoption rate. So basically, if you look here over the years, this is the internet here. Took say 3, 4, 5, then really escalated up. We're pretty much here, and it's going to go whoosh straight up. And cryptocurrency is going to go as quick as that, and probably faster. So they're actually saying that the number of blockchain wallet users will rise very, very quickly, and they're saying the forecasted number of blockchain wallets will increase extremely fast with the internet going forward. And this is 2019 here. So this movement is going to be huge, and with that movement, cryptocurrency is going to go whoosh. Potentially, well, with this straight up by the looks of it, if you've got demand like this, they're effectively saying cryptocurrency and gold are the way to go. This is Deutsche Bank, okay, in terms of their own stats. So they say the future of cryptocurrency needs to overcome 3 main hurdles to become widespread. First, they must legitimise in the eyes of governments and regulators. This means bringing stability to the price and bringing advantages to both merchants and consumers. And it must be for global reach in the payment markets. To do this, alliance must be forged with key stakeholders, mobile apps such as Apple Pay, Google Pay, card providers such as Visa, MasterCard, retailers such as Amazon and Walmart. We're starting to see this with a lot of big companies in the US, okay? They say that the challenges can be overcome, the eventual future of cash is at risk, but new challenges will arise. So we won't go into all that, but they're actually saying that this movement is already starting. This movement's already starting out of cash into cryptocurrency, and they go on to say the next decade we'll see a new mainstream cryptocurrency, and it'll be faster than the pickup of the internet. And I do agree with that, absolutely. So look, I'll leave it at that, guys. There's a lot there in that report. I hope I haven't gone too long, but please do look after yourself. Be kind to yourself, be kind to your family and friends. Be kind to your pretty cats, your beautiful animals, everything. Oh, also, I must mention, I'm going to put up a photo of Sarah and her beautiful little dog. Matthew, her father, got this gorgeous dog and wasn't treated very well, and now it gets its hair done and it looks absolutely gorgeous, and it's got a Christmas little outfit on. I really want to thank Sarah and Matthew for being so kind and looking after this beautiful little dog called Talia. Thank you, guys. Look after yourself. Close this down somehow.